Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a phenomenon that's been kicking around for about a century, baffling scientists and, totally inspiring science fiction writers. It's called the Biefeld-Brown effect. And the promise? Well, it's silent, propellantless flight. But the real question is any of it actually true? All right, let's just jump right in with this really simple but kind of revolutionary idea. Imagine a device that can fly silently. No propellers, no jets, not a single moving part. I know, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, right? But believe it or not, the basic effect is very, very real. So get this. The U.S. Army Research Laboratory actually built and tested these things. They're called asymmetric capacitors, which is just a fancy way of saying you have a big electrode and a small one. And when you pump a ton of voltage through them, yep, they confirmed it produces a real measurable force. They even have a nickname for them. Lifters. Why? Because, well, they can literally lift their own weight. And that mysterious force has fueled decades, and I mean decades, of speculation. So that's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to investigate the science behind it and try to answer the big question. Is this some kind of new revolutionary propulsion or just a classic case of misunderstood physics? Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we've got to go way back to the very beginning, to a single inventor working in the 1920s. So you have this inventor, Thomas Townsend Brown, and he's experimenting with something called a Coolidge tube. It's basically a type of X-ray tube. And he notices something odd. He thinks he's stumbled onto a brand new principle, something that connects electromagnetism and gravity, because he saw that the tube itself seemed to push forward whenever he turned it on. You can actually watch his ideas change over time just by looking at his patents. It's pretty fascinating. He starts out in 1928, and he's all in on linking electricity and gravity. But then, fast forward to 1960, and suddenly, any mention of gravity is just gone. Now he's calling it an electrokinetic apparatus. And then, in 1965, he makes his most important claim, the one that changes everything. This thing, he says, works even in a vacuum. Now, Brown wasn't working completely alone on this. He actually named the discovery in honor of his mentor, a professor named Paul Biefeld. And that's how we get the name Biefeld-Brown effect. It was really their experiments together back in the 20s that laid the foundation for this whole crazy field of study. All right, so here's the crucial question, right? What in the world is actually creating this lift? This is what the Army Research Lab wanted to figure out, and they zeroed in on two main explanations. Okay, so the two leading theories. On one hand, you've got ionic wind. This is the simple one. It's basically a recoil effect. The device ionizes air particles and shoots them out, pushing itself in the opposite direction. Easy enough. Then you have ion drift, which is a little more complex. Here, the ions don't just fly away. They sort of drift slowly through the air, bumping into other neutral molecules and passing on their momentum. And this is exactly where that first theory, ionic wind, really starts to fall apart. See, the Army Research Lab actually did the math. They calculated the absolute best-case scenario, maximum lift that this theory could possibly produce. They even imagined heavy copper ions being stripped from the wire itself. And the force they came up with? A measly 0.002 of a gram. Just tiny. And, well, that's a problem. A big one. That force is at least 1,000 times too weak to explain what people were actually seeing. These little experimental lifters, they weigh 3 to 5 grams. So ionic wind, it just doesn't add up. There's no way it can be the main reason these things fly. So that brings us to the other theory, ion drift. And this one seems a lot more plausible. The Army report uses this fantastic analogy. They describe the cloud of ions as a low-mobility molasses. So forget about a fast wind. It's more like the device is pushing against this thick, sticky, charged fluid that it creates right around itself. And when they run the numbers for this theory, using the nitrogen ions that are all around us in the air, what do they get? About 16 grams of force. Now that is a number that makes sense. It's more than enough to lift a 5 grams of ice. And that's why, for the effect in air, ion drift is the leading scientific explanation. Case closed, right? Well, not quite. Because this is where we get to the most critical question of all. The billion-dollar question, really. The one that separates some interesting but conventional physics from something truly revolutionary. And the question is this:
Does the effect work in a vacuum? Because think about it. If the force is all about ion drift, about pushing against that molasses of air, then it absolutely positively should not work in space. You take away the air, you take away the molasses, and the force has to disappear, period.
But the inventor himself, Thomas Townsend Brown, was adamant that it did. In a personal letter that was actually reproduced in the Army's report, Brown claimed his own vacuum tests back in the 50s were a success. He said they proved, quote, quite conclusively that the device operated in a high vacuum, meaning that ionic wind or any interaction with the air could not be the whole story. You can see the problem here for the scientific community, right? Brown's evidence is purely anecdotal. We're talking about a personal letter. There are no lab notes, no peer-reviewed papers. There's just nothing to verify. And that's exactly why the Army's report concludes that until someone, anyone, performs a rigorous, modern, verifiable experiment in a vacuum, this will remain the single biggest unanswered question in this whole mystery. Of course, a big scientific mystery like this, that's exactly where speculation and science fiction love to jump in. So let's have a little fun and explore how you could maybe engineer these ideas into some kind of futuristic craft. Okay, let's really get speculative here. You could imagine a craft that uses a super powerful atom ionizer for lift. Think of it as a scaled-up, souped-up version of our little lifter, creating thrust in air or even in space. For steering, how about using theoretical particles called magnetic monopoles to interact with a planet's magnetic field? And to power the whole shebang, well, you'd probably need a compact onboard nuclear reactor. Now, I gotta be clear about a key part of that blueprint. Those magnetic monopoles. They are, at this point, purely theoretical. Physicists have predicted they could exist, but nobody has ever observed one. I mean, just discovering a single magnetic monopole would be a Nobel Prize-winning, history-making achievement. So that kind of shows you just how far we are from building this sci-fi dream machine. So that leaves us right back where we started. What exactly is the Biefeld-Brown effect? Is it just a cool but limited atmospheric phenomenon? Basically a silent fan with no moving parts? Or, if those claims about it working in a vacuum could ever be proven, does it hold the key to a technology that could literally change the world? For now, the answer is still out there, waiting to be discovered.